Right, let's pick up that story about the national broadcaster copying it. Widespread condemnation, you saw that there, about Australia's National Day tomorrow, calling it Invasion Day in an online article. Now, the article, which is a guide to Australia Day activities, which has been changed by the ABC today, also referred to the 26th of January as, quote, a day to mourn the past and to galvanise the community to address ongoing systemic racial injustice. Their words, not mine. Communications Minister Paul Fletcher said the national broadcaster was wrong to publish the article, while New South Wales Police Minister David Elliott went further.
I said to media yesterday that it was breathtakingly irresponsible, and I was being polite, because if you've ever wanted evidence that the ABC are out of touch with reality, well, then yesterday was exactly the case. I've made it very, very clear that I'll be making a formal complaint against the ABC, because I just cannot believe that the national broadcaster, funded by the taxpayers of Australia, have decided to take upon themselves to tell people to go to an event that's going to actually put their lives in danger.
All right, I'd like to get into there, isn't there? Joining me tonight to discuss this and more, Steve Waddell, State Editor for the Courier Mail from Brisbane, and from Canberra, National Political Editor of the Herald Sun, Tom Minear. Steve, I'll come to you first if I can. The ABC, they're really copying it over this Invasion Day article. We've seen the comments just then from Paul Fletcher and David Elliott. Can the ABC management expect further blowback from the government over this? And how do you think it's going down with their listeners and their viewers?
Well, I'm always a little uncomfortable when the federal government starts kind of pushing around the ABC about what should be on its websites and in its news broadcast. But I don't think there's any kind of quabble here at all. I think the ABC stepped a little bit too far. There are some events around the place that are called Invasion Day events, and I think what they were attempting to do was highlight that those events are on. But this is an incredibly vexed issue. It's a tough one for them to handle, and I think removing it was probably the right idea. But in the end, does it solve anything? Are we going to have the same debate on January 25 next year? Probably. I really would hope in this country we could start talking about Indigenous disadvantage on more days than January 25th, that we could start talking about, helping some of those communities where domestic violence is rife. We see it in the communities in Queensland, yet the focus on these communities is nowhere near big enough on a federal level. I just think if we could finally shift the debate to those kind of things and not be talking about Australia Day, it'd be great for Australia.
Well, it would be good, Steve, and I'll go to you now here on this, Tom, but it would be good, of course, but the ABC often glosses over that. I bet you if I look at media mentions, there'll be a hell of a lot more said and spoken about January 26th than there ever is about domestic violence or Indigenous disadvantage or the abuse of kids in some of these remote communities. I know this network, my show, we talk about that at least every couple of weeks, if not more. I don't see that attention with the commercial networks, and certainly not the ABC, Tom. And in Melbourne tomorrow, and we saw this in the middle of last year, in the middle of a pandemic, Black Lives Matter had rules that didn't apply to anyone else. And they're out there tomorrow with a big protest march. They call themselves the Warriors of the Aboriginal Resistance. The Herald Sun ran with that this afternoon. What can you tell us?
Yeah, look, I think that's one of the concerning things about the ABC article. It was, I suppose, on one level, the headline that sort of joined Invasion Day and Australia Day is sort of interchangeable terms, and that's obviously an issue. But yeah, to your point about the rally obviously being held in Melbourne, I know David Elliott just before talking about the rally in Sydney as well. We are still in a pandemic, and I know people have sort of strong views about these issues. There is a willingness to protest, but I think we've sort of got to have a pretty common sense position that maybe that the time isn't right to have these sort of mass gatherings where you've got that public health risk. I think, as Steve said, we do have this debate every year. We have this argument every year, and I totally agree with what he said before, that I think it'd be really important if, while Australia Day is an issue that is important to some, but to a lot of people, I think we have pretty strong views that are pretty divergent in Australia about the merits of having Australia Day on January 26th. But yeah, look, I think the bigger problem is, as you said, Indigenous disadvantage in this country. I don't think we spend enough time talking about the fact that the closing the gap targets aren't being met. I know Ken White was talking this week about Indigenous incarceration being an issue that we really need to deal with. And obviously those things aren't as easy to encapsulate in a headline, in a story. They're very complex things to get into, and they have been for decades. But it would be great if we saw more energy dedicated to dealing with those kind of more systemic issues, rather than the kind of the easy debate we have around change the date, don't change the date, because we seem to fall into the same trap every year, I suppose.
Well, I think if you look at the polls, everyday Australians are not in that space, but I think the commentariat absolutely is, and there's a range of sporting identities yet again this year also in that space.